What's up, guys? Welcome to a new day. I'm Stephanie Ryder, and this is the 365 Shares podcast. It's January 19th, 2024, and this is the 19th episode of the 365 Shares podcast. Today's topic is recreation. And the Big Red Book says, "Yet our children and relationships were still mired in our dysfunction. We recreated the abandonment and loss of our own childhood." And I've talked a lot about recreating old wounds, particularly for me in my context of romantic relationships. But the book also really talks about it as when we go from being children to adult children and then have our own children, and we carry our family dysfunction onto the children. And there are a lot of passages in the Big Red Book about we wanted to be different. We never wanted to be the type of parents that we had. We never wanted to yell. We never wanted to drink. We never wanted to get divorced, all these things. And the book says unless we find our own healing, unless we really do the work, unless we find a community of people who are intentionally making better choices, then we're going to recreate some of the dysfunction of our childhood because we just don't know any better. And it makes sense. I mean, how can you do something you don't know how to do? So a lot of us grew up with alcoholic or dysfunctional parents who grew up with alcoholic or dysfunctional parents, and so on and so on. The example that really comes to mind is when I was married to my ex-husband. He had a lot of hurt and resentment about his own parents, particularly his father, who was a workaholic and was very angry, I think, in my ex-husband's childhood and absent, never threw a ball with him, would, be a very strict authoritarian and expected a lot from his children. And I didn't know that version of his father. I knew the retired version of his father who was much more mild-mannered. And he told me one time at dinner that his only goal as a father was to provide for his family and make money, which he did, and not to be an alcoholic. And he accomplished both of those goals. From my ex-husband's legitimate point of view, there were so many other things that he didn't accomplish as a father that my ex-husband would have wanted. But from his father's point of view, the two most egregious things that his parents subjected him to were poverty and extreme alcoholism. So from my ex-husband's father's point of view, he took those two huge things and said, I'm not going to do this one. We're not going to be poor. I'm going to work hard. And I'm not going to be an alcoholic. And I think that he probably had that tendency. He was very meticulous about how many drinks he had. And it was like he could have 2 beers at night, which was very similar to how my grandmother was. It was like, there's this old school rule that, like it's not really part of our generation, but everyone older had this sort of like rules of alcoholism. And in one of them was you're not an alcoholic if you only have 2 drinks a night. And so 2 beers a night definitely falls, within that limitation. And he was really care what size the drinks were. So she could have like a big gulp full of gin and tonic and then have another one. And that was 2 drinks. But so my ex-husband's father succeeded in not being an alcoholic, and he made a lot of money. He was a very successful attorney, and his family financially lived very well. But obviously that was not everything that my ex-husband would have wanted from a nurturing and a loving perspective and from a quality time perspective. But then if you look at his father's father, as I mentioned, there was extreme alcoholism. I believe both of his parents were falling down. Well, his father was a falling down drunk from the stories. His mother, I think, was a very mean drunk who lived a long time, but not in terribly good health. And from the sounds of it, was only nice to one person in the family, and that was one of the granddaughters. There were multiple granddaughters, but she was only nice to one of them. So he grew up in a very poor household and not at all a nurturing household, and in fact, an actively hostile household. The stories are that his father's father was a crooked New York City cop who, just fill in the blanks of every sort of stereotype you can think of a bad cop. And then his father, the story was, got shipped over from Ireland at 13 with a little bit of money and an address and a name written down in his pocket of the relatives that he was going to join when he got to the United States, Well, when he got to the United States, those relatives either didn't exist or had moved, and there was no way to contact them. So he showed up from Ireland on a boat to America in a new country, in New York City, by himself with no family, and just had to figure out how to survive. And it probably wasn't out of ill will that his parents sent him over. It was probably related to poverty and, famine, and just they thought maybe they probably scraped together the money to get him on the ship and thought that it would give him a better life, not knowing that the better life wouldn't come until many, many generations later. And from what I've heard through friends, I no longer have communication with my ex-husband, but through friends, I understand that he is happily remarried and that he has kids, and they're very wealthy. And I'm sure that his children are going to have a great life, and I hope that they have a great life. But it's like 6 generations down from his great, 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 whatever, grandfather coming over as a young boy from Ireland. So it takes such a long time for families to slowly give better to their children. And then even, I'm sure, when my ex's children grow up, they're going to have their own beefs. And that's normal. But, hopefully they will also have an understanding that their dad gave them better than what he got. And I hope he does. So there's just really so much to it. And, I had a similar story on my side. I mean, my parents definitely were problematic characters. My father was an adult child of Holocaust survivors. My mom was a granddaughter of a serious alcoholic and from a big Catholic family with way too many people and not enough money. They did their best, and in some ways they did a good job, especially in my early childhood. I think they did a very good job, and I got the benefit of that. And I think they definitely got better than they got, but we can only do so much. So if you're an adult child and you're thinking about your family, definitely feel your feelings and definitely feel entitled to any resentment that you have, any sadness or grief that you have about the way things weren't, that you wish they would have been. But also just try to put a little bit of context around it and understand what they had growing up. And hopefully they tried to do a better job than their parents did. And hopefully they succeeded in doing at least a little bit of a better job than their parents did. And regardless of how they did or didn't do, you're listening and you're interested in recovery. Maybe you're in children of alcoholics or another 12-step program. Maybe you're just thinking about it, testing the waters. But either way, you've found your way here. So something had to set off the chain of dominoes to get you to this point in your life where you're devoting minutes, hours, whatever of your valuable time being mindful and thinking about recovery. And if you have children of your own, I'm sure you're doing your very, very best. And that's all you can do. The passage in Strengthening My Recovery also talks about this feeling that we have a choice and we could do the work of recovery and repair our relationships. And in the book, they're really talking a lot about relationships with adult children that you have, but it can be anyone in your life or in your family. And to do that, you have to overcome this hurdle of, I should have started this earlier, or I've already screwed up my kids, or I've already damaged my relationship with my spouse, or now maybe your former spouse. And you have to get over that self-blame and shame of wishing that you had found the program sooner. I definitely wish I had found the program sooner. I would have loved if I had found it when I was even in high school. I think I would have been really interested in going to meetings in high school. But at any point after that, if I had known about it, I would have definitely been interested. And I wish that some people in my family who have sadly now passed would have been aware of it, because there were definitely a few members of my family, in particular my grandfather, who really were interested in why they were the way that they were. And I think they would have done, and they did a lot of things, what they knew, whether it was groups, whether it was religious, speaking with clergy members, reading books to try to get better. But I think this program would have been so helpful to a lot of people. I'm Steph, and this is my share. The affirmation for today is, on this day, I will take care of myself first. Only then will I be available to my family if they ask for emotional support. This passage really makes me think about codependency. It reminds me of the now very popular phrase, putting on your own oxygen mask first before assisting others, which comes from airplanes. And the rationale on planes is if you're a parent with children, if you try to put your kids' oxygen masks on first, but you yourself run out of oxygen midway through, you either won't be able to finish helping them or they won't be able to help you if you pass out. So on an airplane, you're supposed to put your own oxygen mask on if something happens and the cabin depressurizes, and then you can assist other people once you're safely sure of an oxygen source. And this has been really adopted by therapeutic circles to mean you really have to make sure your own emotional needs are being met before you're running around trying to assist other people. And with codependency, there's a tendency to feel like we have to take care of everyone else and we have to be needed because we have no inherent worth without being useful, which is not true, but which a lot of us have that maladaptive viewpoint or negative self-belief. From that perspective of wanting to assist other people, we often fail to take care of ourselves. And I love the book Codependent No More, which I have an audiobook and I listen to it all the time. I'll just listen to a random chapter. If I'm feeling codependent or worried about other people's problems or other people and I'm stressing out, and it talks about how codependents are wonderful at taking care of other people. They can feed and clothe children. They can take care of an inebriated spouse. They can hold down the household. They can even have jobs outside of the household and be very accomplished employees because they're very concerned about making other people happy. But codependents have this limiting self-belief that they can't take care of themselves, which is obviously insane because all evidence would point to the contrary. They're doing so many things for so many people. And I think there's also a misconception that for codependents of like, we're so low on the totem pole that in order to have the luxury of meeting our own needs, we have to get through our to-do list or a checklist of everything else that quote unquote has to get done. So we have to take care of the kids. We have to take care of the spouse. We have to do the church volunteer work or the PTO work. We have to obviously do what we need to do at work or we'll get fired. Any of these myriad responsibilities that we take on. And for a lot of codependents, because we have so many people in our lives and because we commit ourselves to so many things, we just conveniently never get to the part of the to-do list that's about taking care of us. We just don't have time to exercise because we're doing so many things for other people. We just don't have time to go to the salon and get a haircut, get our nails done, because think of all the things that we could be doing for other people that are selfless that we should be doing. And it's all these little value judgments. It's all these little mischaracterizations of how we should prioritize our time. And it all just really comes down, I think, to a lack of value. But I love that the book here is saying, I will take care of myself first. Only then will I be able to provide emotional support to my family. Because the more we deplete ourselves and the less we focus on self-care, the more angry and resentful we become. So maybe we're still feeding our kids, but maybe we're yelling at them all the time. Or maybe we are a faithful spouse who's doing more than our fair share of the housework, but maybe we're withholding sex or we're nagging constantly or we're doing all these little passive aggressive things or making little mean comments about how the other person isn't measuring up. And those things all accumulate and lead to a lack of satisfaction in our interpersonal relationships, which ultimately hurts us. So it's kind of that image of the angry codependent who's doing all these things, but they're really acting like a martyr and they're really in a bad mood all. And there's even a Bible story about it. And I just pulled this up on Wikipedia because I don't have callback of biblical stories from memory. But it's Jesus at the home of Mary and Martha. And the passage reads, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. And this is a great biblical story about codependency. One of the sisters is doing all the work and the Lord has arrived, so she's got to make sure everything is perfect. So there's perfectionism here. There is a sense of duty of what should be done for him. But the other sister's really just being present, and she's really just enjoying this once in a lifetime experience that she's having with Jesus. And he's telling them what should be prioritized is not the work, which has to get done every day and would be done for anyone who came to visit who was any kind of notoriety or of importance. But he's just saying be present. What's important here is the love. What's important here is the message. What's important here is communing together. And I'm not going to tell her to do more work and be distracted just so that you have less work to do. And the subtext here is that he's telling the sister who's doing more work, come join us. Come hang out. Come listen to my message. So I really like that as far back as the time of Jesus, we have this message of like, there's more important things than just the tasks and the chores. Existing and being humans and feeling our feelings and learning and taking care of our emotions is so much more important than all these other little ticky-tack things that we think define our value, and they don't. So I think that's a good message. For me, I've really just been focused on a lot of self-care. My partner and I have been trying to conceive for some time. We have not been successful to date, but I know that it will happen at some point. And obviously, if it doesn't happen, we will look into other options like adoption. But part of that fertility journey has meant a lot of health and self-care for us. So I've been working a lot on reducing inflammation and cutting things out of my diet that I know are inflammatory to me. So cutting out gluten. I found out soy is very inflammatory to me. And once I'm off of it for a while, and then if I have it even by accident, there's a lot of soybean oil used in mayonnaise. So if I'm out, like I can't have tuna salad because that could have soybean oil in it, and I feel very bloated. I recently cut out alcohol, and I'm very thankful and lucky that I don't have a problem with alcohol. I was never in my younger years, in my 20s, I was a heavy alcohol user for fun. But for the past 10 years, I have been more of a social drinker, or like a glass of wine with dinner because I like wine. But for the past 3 months, except for one glass of wine on Thanksgiving that gave me a headache, I haven't had any alcohol. And I actually feel really good. And the first month was kind of hard just because when I would go out, like if I went to a Mexican restaurant with friends, I was used to having a margarita, or I wanted that glass of wine. But my partner and I just have been getting mocktails if we go out. And it's always fun. I think like it gives you that same joy of having a drink made for you that's a little bit unique. And like maybe it's ginger beer and lime and soda water, or like muddled fruit. There's all these different things that they make. And it's just fun to have something unique to drink once in a while. And then Whole Foods sells this alcohol or this wine with the alcohol removed. And I had a bottle of rosé the other day. It was like alcohol-free rosé, and mixed it with some seltzer water to make a spritzer. And it was like the best thing ever. So I've just really been enjoying that. And I feel good. And I feel everything I cut out of my diet just makes me feel better. And the bonus is that it makes me less bloated. I've always been someone who like carries weight around my middle, and I just kind of keep getting like more where I don't feel like my stomach's always sticking out. I always, even as a kid, would just like eat something and then have this like huge food baby. And so I really, if I avoid the things that I know are inflammatory to me, I don't walk around with this giant uncomfortable food baby. And I love that. It makes me really happy. And I wish when I was younger that I had figured out that it was just certain foods that cause that. And I wish I would have figured out to stop eating those foods, because then I wouldn't have had this bloating all the time, which is also bad for your organs, it turns out. So there's just a lot of ways that self-care is important. And when I feel better physically, when I prioritize my sleep, when I prioritize exercise, I'm in a better mood, and that's better for everyone else. And I'm also just better able to be present with people and to listen and be empathetic, versus if I was constantly running around doing things for other people and just like grabbing something out of fast food, even though it didn't make me feel good because I felt like I had to do all these other chores. And I wasn't sleeping enough because I was like trying to stay up talking to people who, needed to talk about their problems. And I would be maybe spending more time on other people, but I really don't think the quality of the time that I would be giving other people would be as good as it is now, where I'm targeted with when I talk to people, who I interact with, and the type of help that I provide. And so I really try to make the assistance that I give to other people like helpful and joyful and not something that I'm resentful of. And all of that just comes back to self-care and making sure that I prioritize myself, which is hard to do, but practice, do something small, go to the gym, go for a walk, stop and get your nails done, get your hair cut, go meet someone and hang out. Like just spend quality time with someone and don't feel guilty about it. Or I love rainy days. When I was growing up, we always had to be very busy. We were supposed to be doing homework or housework or something, playing a sport. But on rainy days in the summer when we didn't have school, and we didn't go to the pool. There was a neighborhood pool that we would go to. We didn't go to the pool. We didn't have to go to anything with friends. Rainy days at home in the summer were just free days. And I loved that. And I would just sit in my room and read. My grandmother would make us lunch and we would just kind of hang out, and she would do crossword puzzles. And so just give yourself the permission to have a lazy day or a rainy day where you do something that's joyful for you. And that's your homework. Just give yourself permission without feeling guilty to just do something that makes you happy.